Biden's forces. The list works more like a bad reputation label than an actual ban. Its purpose is to warn U.S. entities about the firm's ties to the Chinese military, so American businesses would be more cautious about working with them. And while it may not ban U.S. firms from doing businesses with these companies. But the 2024 National Defense Act does ban the Pentagon from working with any Chinese companies on the list. Many Chinese companies that self-describe as civil entities fail to declare their dual-use products that is related to China's military-civil fusion strategy, under which civilian firms are used to help advance Beijing's military development. The U.S. is expanding efforts to counter that tactic. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis plans to deploy up to 1,000 members of the National Guard to Texas to help at the southern border. DeSantis said in a statement our reinforcement will help Texas to add additional barriers, including razor wire along the border. We don't have a country if we don't have a border. That is in addition to more than 90 officers already there representing various Florida law enforcement agencies. This comes as Texas Governor Greg Abbott has declared an invasion amid a surge in border crossings and set up a razor wire along some parts of the Rio Grande River. A coalition of 27 states has formed to support Texas's right to defend itself after the Supreme Court ruled that border agents can remove the razor wire. As of the end of 2023, 14 states have deployed personnel and resources to assist in Operation Lone Star. More than 10 million illegal immigrants have reportedly crossed the border since President Joe Biden took office. Oregon officials have declared a state of emergency.
Some of the most horrific human rights abuses. What are some of your concerns coming out of China?
Well, China's the worst in the world. Let me just say it. They are the worst in the world because they attack and suppress more faith communities.
But Iran has close relations with Beijing. China has risen as Iran's biggest oil and trading partner. It has also helped Iran with its technological development. The indictment represents the latest effort by U.S. authorities to counter Chinese threats on U.S. soil. Back in October, FBI Director Chris Wray warned about Beijing's active attempts to steal American intellectual property and bring it back to China and other foreign assets. Over the last several years, the U.S. has seen a 1,300% increase in economic espionage cases with links to China. Back to the indictment of the Chinese nationals, authorities said the defendants used front companies in China and Hong Kong to funnel the flow, and the effort lasted at least 13 years, from 2007 to 2020. If convicted, they face up to 35 years in prison. The DOJ has issued arrest warrants, though the suspects currently live in China. To discuss more about concerns of smuggling sensitive U.S. technology to Iran's military, we sat down with Andrew Thornbrook, national security correspondent for the Epoch Times. Andrew Thornbrook, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Tiffany. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, the Justice Department has charged 4 Chinese nationals on Tuesday. This is for allegedly smuggling U.S.-made electronic parts to sanctioned Iranian entities. Now, the concern is that these parts could be used for making ballistic missiles and drones. How concerning is all of this?
This is one instance in which we have numerous individuals who, over the course of more than a decade, essentially exploited loopholes in the U.S. Export regime to take sensitive technologies out of the U.S. into China, where they then forward them to Iran. This is not the first time. So even just last year, we also had another similar case with parts being exported for potential use in weapons of mass destruction in Iran. So this is an ongoing issue, and it is quite concerning.
On that note, the indictment said that the defendants used front companies in China and Hong Kong to then funnel the flow, and that the effort lasted at least 13 years. So given that time frame, why did it take this long to discover it, and how does that bespeak of the differences between, say, the U.S. and China when it comes to handling cases like this?
So there's always the question of how long was the fact-finding and evidence-building taking. It's unclear how long we knew exactly that these were actually ending up in Iran, for example. But yeah, it's quite concerning. There's other cases similar, like the one I just spoke of with the WMDs last year, that also went on for decades. That one goes back to the 90s. And so these have spanned multiple administrations in the United States. They've spanned multiple leaders in both Iran and China. So it's something that we have to really be focused on and trying to curb right now.
And how does all of this fit into the new axis of evil that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell was speaking of last year?
Yeah, I think this has been on our radar for some time, right? We've been sort of dealing with this concept of the new axis with China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia for probably 20 years now. And this is something that we're going to have to look out for, right? We just had former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, for example, testifying before Congress that Iran and China are explicitly coordinating for the purpose of undermining the U.S. and for stretching our resources thin. So really, the question now is going to become, I think, why were these technologies allowed to be exported to China in the first place? Why is it the case that we were allowing such a sensitive technology to flow to the Chinese Communist Party, but only got upset about it when it went from there to Iran?
Andrew Thornbrook, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me, Tiffany. It's a pleasure to be here.
Next, Senator Marco Rubio is accusing news agency CBS of spreading Beijing's propaganda tied to the Uyghur ethnic group. The publication describes the Xinjiang region as a happy home for the Uyghurs. He says the article aids the Chinese Communist Party's effort to, quote, obscure the truth. In a letter from the senator to a CBS News executive on Wednesday, he said, quote, CBS News chose to work with the propaganda department of a genocidal political party by publishing a puff piece that does more to obscure the truth rather than expose it. CBS News crews were invited to visit Xinjiang, where most Chinese Uyghurs live. The trip was organized by a Chinese information office, which many believe functions as a propaganda arm of the communist regime. The article CBS later published denies many reports that detail Beijing's suppression of the Uyghurs. As for why, CBS said its American news workers did not witness that suppression. Communist China faces multiple accusations linked to the Uyghurs on the world stage, including genocide, forced labor, and forced abandonment of ethnic culture and religion. Zooming out, Senator Rubio also warned that the process of creating the CBS story might have violated U.S. sanctions. That's by working with restricted Chinese state-run entities. The article, titled The Rebranding of Xinjiang by Elizabeth Palmer, was published early January. NTD reached out to CBS for comment, but did not hear back before airtime. Human Rights Watch releasing a warning for automakers with operations in China, urging them to make sure that materials involving forced labor are kept out of their supply chain. The automakers that were called out, Tesla, Volkswagen, and BYD. The human rights group said it found evidence that aluminum producers in Xinjiang hired workers from state-backed labor transfer programs. China uses aluminum produced in Xinjiang to manufacture automotive parts. Those parts then get sold to car makers around the world. The companies are responsible under United Nations principles to ensure forced labor is not used in their supply chains. Xinjiang is China's #2 region for aluminum production. Volkswagen told Reuters that it takes a firm stance against forced labor and immediately investigated any allegations. Tesla did not respond to a query from Reuters. Toyota said it would closely review the Human Rights Watch report and that it expected suppliers to respect human rights. Tensions are rising between the U.S. and China as the potential for a Beijing invasion of Taiwan looms. How is Washington preparing for possible war? Here's a closer look. NTD's Dave Martin has the story.
Rewind to August 2023. A round of high-profile military drills between the U.S. and Australia were in full swing, called the Talisman Sabre exercises. They practiced amphibious landings, ground combat, and air operations. But besides deepening cooperation, they also held a discrete value. U.S. officials told Reuters that the drills created new stockpiles of military equipment that were left behind in Australia after the drills ended. It included roughly 330 vehicles and trailers and 130 containers in warehouses in southeastern Australia. That gear would prove enough to supply about 3 logistics companies with as many as 500 or more soldiers and could power a future drill, a natural disaster, or aid at war. The Pacific region would be one of the greatest choke points and potential vulnerabilities if conflict broke out over Taiwan. The move falls in line with efforts to shore up possible weak points and boost Western preparedness.
Is Taiwan the nation's maritime sovereignty in the disputed South China Sea? And there's more. The country's Navy spokesperson on Thursday said the plan was to acquire, quote, definitely more than one. Interested suppliers include France, Spain, Korea, and Italy. The potential purchase is part of Philippines' modernization plan, estimated to cost over $35 billion. Manila refers to the part of the South China Sea within its exclusive economic zone as the West Philippines Sea. China claims most of the hotly contested water as its own. An international tribunal invalidated that claim in 2016. Farmers still rise on the city's 2019. The event pro-democracy movement, which posed an unprecedented challenge to Beijing that year, eventually leading to the imposition of a sweeping national security law to suppress dissent. Here's more.
A Hong Kong court on Thursday found 4 people guilty of rioting after the city's legislature was stormed during pro-democracy protests in 2019. They include actor Gregory Wong, seen here arriving at the courthouse this morning. Hundreds of protesters besieged Hong Kong's Legislative Council building on July 1st, 2019, the anniversary day of the city's handover from Britain's colonial rule to China. It followed a protest march against a proposed extradition bill that would have allowed authorities to send individuals to face trial in mainland China. During the trial, Wong said he was there solely to deliver charges to journalists who were covering the break-in. Video evidence played by the prosecution showed him leaving the chamber immediately after handing charges to a reporter. But the judge said on Thursday, Wong could have met the reporter outside the building and pointed out that he took into account the actor's celebrity status, saying, quote, with his fame, he could attract the attention of demonstrators so as to promote, assist, or encourage the riots. Among the 4 convicted of rioting, 1 man was additionally found guilty of criminal damage, while 2 reporters were acquitted of rioting but found guilty of unlawfully entering or staying in the building. The verdict comes after 8 others had already pleaded guilty to charges over the break-in. Sentencing will take place later. Those convicted of rioting face up to 7 years in prison.
Hong Kong authorities arrested more than 10,000 people in its efforts to squash the 2019 pro-democracy protests. The huge protests first erupted over a piece of legislation that threatened to allow criminal suspects to be sent to mainland China for trial. Britain returned Hong Kong to Chinese rule in 1997, but under one condition, that the financial hub could keep its wide-ranging autonomy and judicial independence, something not seen in mainland China.